Hey, I have been watching you from behind. How did you create entire report under 5 minutes?
Simple, because I've been using the latest AI features of Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint, I'm able to do all of this work just under 5 minutes.
Can you please teach me the same?
Absolutely I can.
In today's video, we are about to see what is pivot table. Again, I'm creating a pivot table in this particular video for all versions, not for a specific version. So let's see what is a pivot table is all about. When we go to the pivot table, again, general question, or this is one of the most used feature in Excel. The general question comes into play for many people that what is a pivot table? You can name the pivot table in any one of these bullet points. You can call them as summarizing a data, or I can call this as calculation with criteria. And if I want to elaborate that, then I call that as creating a report that contains calculation with conditions or criteria. When I go to the pivot table, many people used to tell me that, when you do pivot table, it is working for you. When we do it, it is not working for us. Why we are not able to get the pivot table exactly how you get it? The simple reason is I follow the following rules here. By that way, it allows me to use the pivot table effectively. The first part is I cannot have a blank header in my data set, and then I need to have a proper data set is required to build a pivot table, which I mean is we should not have a blank cell or a row or a column. But pretty unfortunately, we sometime won't get such a data, or most of the time we won't get it. If that is the case, you can either, if you're allowed to change the dimension of the data set, then you can delete those cells and rows and columns which you don't want it. In some situation, we can also add a 0 wherever it is possible if you are not allowed to delete the data set here. So these are the 3 rules that I have to follow. Again, when I use versions, I have different versions altogether coming up right now. I can see that I have a keyboard shortcut for the following versions. Again, these are the versions. It's still alive, I think so. I don't think anybody is using 2010 and above right now. The keyboard shortcuts are only 3 variants here. Alt DP for the oldest version. You will either use an Alt NV or Alt NVT. If you're using 2013 and 16 version, then your keyboard shortcut will remain as Alt NV. If it is not so, then you can retain one keyboard shortcut that is universal right now, is called Alt NVT, which comes from 2007, 10, 19, 21, and Office 365 latest version will all run the data in that way. Before I go into a practical example of pivot table, I would like to just give you an idea what are the floating menus that we will get in a pivot table. By that way, you can control the pivot table better. I am again giving a small example here. Probably we will be seeing an entire interactive dashboard we can build in a pivot table in a simpler format, which will be a time saver, plus you can get an interactive dashboard also. In our current video, we are concentrating only on pivot table here. When I go to pivot table, we have a pivot table anatomy that comes into play. Once I add a pivot table by using any of the keyboard shortcuts here, immediately I will be getting these anatomy structures here. The first part is called pivot cache. This is where your pivot table will sit. The second part will be your pivot table field list, where whatever data that you have in your data set that will showcase here. Here you have a sample data set here. Then you have 4 small column comes into play, or 4 boxes to check here. When I give a tick mark in the data set here, my rows and column values will automatically populate here. Wherever I have a data which has a dimension, where I have a text or a date or a city or a sales rep or a customer name comes into play, that will jump into the row. Wherever I have a value of purchase and sales comes into play, that will jump to the value field here. If you want to fill the filter field or a column field, probably those are drag and drop fields. You may not be able to just give a tick mark on top, or you cannot add the checkbox there. That will automatically populate your data in a filter or a column. If you want to fill anything on the filter and column, the drag and drop option only allows you to do that. You can jump to our website here. Our website has few workshops that are coming into play automatically, and when you go to your workshop, you can see these are the following workshops that we have here. This workshop allows you to learn more about ChatGPT and AI tool, how to use it better, and plus you can save at least 2 hours in your routine works in MS Office when you are connecting them with AI tools. Let's jump back to the data set that we are continuing right now. The next data set that we're going to see is what is a pivot table analysis. When I come back to the pivot table analysis, again you can add a lot of other dimensions with the pivot table. The pivot table will allow you to add a slicer, and then you can change this data sets and so on and so forth. In our first pivot table video, we will see 2 variants here. I'll just bring a range based pivot table and a table based pivot table to showcase the difference there, and then which one will be the best one if your data sets are updating for you. The next dimension that we are about to see in the data set will be on the pivot table. This is a menu that we will fiddle around a lot when we are working in a pivot table. You will be using the layouts, grand total, subtotals a lot when we are building it. So I'll be building furthermore videos on our pivot charts, and we will also see how to work with slices when we are using any version above 2010 version here. So let me jump into a data set. So this is the data set that I would like to use for our pivot table. Again, there are 2 different ways that I can build this data. I can call this as a range based one, or I can convert this into a table like I did in my previous video. You can just see that in our add cards here, which allows you to get those information about what is the table is all about. You can convert a range into a table and then build a pivot table also. So let me build 2 pivot tables now. The first pivot table is going to be on the range variant. The next pivot table will be on the table variant here. The advantage of keeping a range and a pivot table is range variant will be a non-updatable pivot table, I can call it as, but again, or I have to spend a lot of time to update the data. So let me showcase what's happening or what will happen when I start building a pivot table. Right now, let's go for the first pivot table that we're going to create, that is called range based. I'll place the cursor in one of the data set. I'll go to my insert tab, and then you can add a pivot table here. If you're using Office 365, you will see a lot of these menus. If you're seeing other versions, the menus will be little different here. I will add few of them if we can in our subsequent videos, but again in our current video I'm working on Office 365 app for enterprises here, so that showcases these menus here. I'm interested in the first line item here, it's called pivot table range or pivot table from a table. So we are planning for a range first. So click the first option here, that's going to populate the data. I'll ask you a question. Normally when we are creating a pivot table, our pivot table always does one thing very clearly. That is, it will ask you a question. Would you like to add a pivot table in the same sheet, or you want to add it in a different sheet? We always keep one thing in common, that we will try to retain the data set in one sheet and the pivot table in another one. That way it will control the data set better. Wherever you want to hide a data set, or wherever you want to move the data set to another sheet, you'll always do it so that your original data or the data that you are building for the pivot table will not be visible for the end users here. So I'm going to use the same logic here. I'm going to give an OK. That's going to populate the data set here, and it's going to show you the data set that I've set or the anatomy that I set to you earlier. This is our pivot cache where a pivot table is going to sit. The pivot table field list, we have only 2 data set here, so it's going to showcase both of them, and you'll see a pivot table analysis on top and then pivot table design subsequently. So I'm going to use few of them here. So when I give a tick box in my date, there will be a logic of auto grouping will automatically happen if you are using any version above 2013 version. If you are using 2010 version and below, then the auto grouping option will not appear. Probably you will see a data something like this. You won't see these additional pop-up data that comes in play. Again, in the recent version, probably the version that I have in Office 365 right now is called 2309. Until the previous version or the one version before, we won't get the complete dimension of our pivot table. When I try to create a large data set here, it gives you only the date hierarchy to a lesser effect, not for the entire effect. When I go back to the date hierarchy, normally the data hierarchy starts with the year and then jumps to the next line called quarter, month, and a date. All the 4 will never come in our previous data sets here or in a previous version here, probably until in Office 365 also. I never saw them all coming up. I generally used to come down here and then give a right click, and then I'll go to the group and then I'll check all the data sets here. That's how it generally works for you. That's what we normally do in a pivot table. But in the latest version, there is change that we are seeing here that allows us to maintain the data differently. So where the data automatically populates all the 4 dimensions. I'll show a larger data a little later, but we will go with this data. And then this is how the data set comes into play. If my agenda says I want to see the monthly sales around, then I don't no longer require a day or date here. Then you can see the data set nicely. And then when I check the box in the sales, that's going to populate. I told you the dimensions will be added to the rows automatically. The measures will be added to the columns or the value fields automatically. But my pivot table will be a little odd to see. So I need to make some cleaning and cleansing. This is where I'll use the first option called design and report layout and show in tabular form. That way it picks up the data perfectly. If you want to rename this, I'll give a right click, go to my field settings, and then I will rename that to a month here. And then if I want to know what's the sales value in, is it in a dollar or a rupees, then I can just come down to the one-stop shop settings. When I go back to our pivot table here, that's called value field settings. Here we can add the number formatting for us. As I'm using original version of Excel, so you can see that it's automatically picking up the region and the countries automatically. So my default currency will be Indian rupees for us. If you want to change anything other than that, you can do that. But again, don't do it in the home menu. Instead, you try to do anything and everything that you want in the value field settings in the number format, which allows you to make sure that you can change them perfectly. Now I'm going to add another point that's called table. So I've already done a video on it. If you want to check that, you can check my previous video. Just I'm adding a table here, and then I'm leaving the table as it is. When I jump to the pivot table here, it won't give you the cell references like I mentioned or like you saw in our previous video. It's going to name the table automatically. I'm going to give an OK. That's going to add a new sheet for me. Then it's going to repeat the same process again. Then I'm going to follow the design, report layout, show in tabular form, and give a right click, value field settings, number format, and then pick up any one of them. I pick up accounting generally. This is the way it works for you. So when I talked about the pivot table creation, I said I am going to create a pivot table in 2 variants. One is the range, another one is the table here. What is the difference it's going to make? If it is a growing data, I will love to keep the data set in a table format. If it is not a non-growing data, then the range will do a good job. For example, let me add another month or 2 in the data set. So I'm going to just add a few more dates here, which is going to talk about the list, and then I'm going to add some valuation here dumbly and showcase the values here. Normally when I add such a data, this data will not accumulate in my pivot table automatically. I have to change the entire data source if I'm bringing a data set in a range. If that's going to happen in a table, that's going to show a different story. So now when I come back to my pivot table, normally when I refresh the pivot table, it's going to update the data if I make a change in the active cells. If I add a new cells, then I'll place the cursor in here. I'll go back to my pivot table analysis and change the data sources. Now you can see the data source that I took on the first range table with the cell references comes until E16 here, but I have 4 more data coming up here. I have to choose all of them and then make an OK here. By that way, it adds the list here. But if I do the same logic in a table, now let me just take this data, copy this, and then go back to my table and paste it below. You can see that automatically my table will extend here. And I no longer want to go back to my pivot table analysis to change the data source. I can just come back here and give a refresh. That's going to automatically add my pivot table here automatically. So this is how we will do pivot table either in a range or in a table featured data set. So I gave you a small idea about what is a pivot table. We'll see more on pivot table as we go forward. Thank you so much for watching this video. Do like, comment and share this video to others, and subscribe the channel for all more informative videos to follow. Thank you so much. Let's start analyzing.